Welcome to our first Barnabas Forum. How is everybody doing? Good. Welcome. My name, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Brett Berger. I'm the director of the Barnabas program. And, All right. So these forums are things that we do with the Barnabas program as co-curricular events. That means we kind of do them here, but they are outside of class time. But these are part of the preparation, the ministry preparation time. And so the philosophy for these, if you haven't been to one, is basically we bring in some local practitioners, those who are doing ministry in the trenches. They're doing the thing that you are aspiring to do. And we just will talk about various topics. This year, our theme is about pastoral identity. And so our 4 conversations that we're going to have this year will be related to identity. We're going to talk about having a healthy identity and the significance of that for ministry. I think this is a very important topic. And we've got some really great people, I think, for examples on kind of fleshing some of this stuff out. But for long-term, healthy, flourishing ministry that lasts, we have to have good, solid, healthy identities. And so that's what our conversation is going to be about tonight. So tonight we are talking about having a healthy identity in ministry. And so I've brought in some friends, all right, to be a part of a panel and to have this conversation with us. And so first, all the way on the right is Ryan Romeo. If any of you have been at Living Streams, you probably recognize Ryan. He is still attending Living Streams, but he is also helping out with a church plant in Ahwatukee called Horizon Church. He's written a couple of books, and he's a very thoughtful guy. I've gotten to know him over the last year or so, and really have been impressed just with his thinking, and his heart. So I'm really excited for Ryan to be with here. He'll tell a little bit of his story as we go here. And then we have our first Barnabas Forum husband and wife team couple here, Shannon and Raygen Mitchell. So a little bit of a story. So Shannon, I put her on the Mount Rushmore of my favorite people on the planet, all right? So she was a college student when I first started out in ministry and was doing college ministry. So she was a part of my first ministry. Shannon you will not walk away from a conversation with Shannon without being encouraged. I'll just say that for sure. So she's great. She has been in ministry for a long time. She's had some hard times and some good times. So she's going to have some great stuff. I'm really excited for her to share from that. Now, she met this character a few years ago. And they fell in love and got married. Raygen Mitchell, who they're both from Scottsdale Bible Church. Raygen is now the campus pastor for their Fountain Hills campus out there. And I think, how long has that been in the works there?
I've been there 5 weeks.
Yes, right. So it's just a new thing,
weeks,
right?
Yeah. I've been with Scottsdale Bible for a month under 3 years. So
yeah. Good. Yes. So he's been in a lot of different roles and now is kind of moving into that role. So anyway, will you welcome my friends here to the panel tonight? Good. All right. So what I would like to start with here is we're talking about healthy identity, and I kind of put this in the context of the broader cultural conversations, right? We hear a lot about identity. Racial identity, ethnic identity, gender identity, sexual identity. We talk about identity politics. So that word identity gets thrown around. But for the purpose of our conversation, if we could maybe take some time and just sort of define the term, what are we talking about when we talk about identity here tonight and having a healthy one?
Yeah, I think it's one of those words that's changed meaning a bit in the last 5 years. And I think identity has always been something far, far deeper than sexuality and some of the things that we try to identify, try to put identity around today. And identity, I think for me, especially as a Christian, I identify as a follower of Jesus. I identify as somebody who is following the way of Jesus. I know that there are spiritual gifts inside of me. This is one thing I think that's so beautiful. You read through Jeremiah. Before you were in your mother's womb, I've called you and I've equipped you in this way. And so those of us that follow Jesus, we believe that there is this crazy thing called spiritual gifts. It's actually the only religion on earth that talks about spiritual gifts. Like, we are each uniquely wired to do something for God that other people are not wired for. And when we wrap our identity around the way that God's gifted us, who we are in Christ, I think we are able to look at each other in a lot more of a healthy way and understand other people's identity as well. But I think the world has been kind of trying to sabotage that word for a reason, because that deep identity of who we are, if the world could wrap it around what we do, if the world could wrap it around our sexuality, if the world could wrap it around things that are temporary or fleeting, he's removed a major piece of our confidence in Christ. And Jesus wants us to have confidence in him. And so I think identity really is rooted and grounded in who you follow, who you are, and how God's made you.
That's good.
Raygen, you want to take a stab at it?
Oftentimes when you meet someone, you say, "Hi, my name is Raygen," and they say, "Hi, my name is Steve," and then Steve will say to you, "So Raygen, what do you do?" Right? Like, how many of you guys, when you get introduced to each other, the first question is what your name is, and the second question is, well, what do you do? Because we are so grounded and rooted in training and belief that you are what you can produce or what you do for other people. So you have to apologize. I was an Assemblies of God pastor for a long time, so I have a lot of euphemisms. We're not human doings, we're human beings, right? And so I think for me, with identity, like he was saying, is we are firmly rooted and grounded, and our identity is in Jesus Christ. So the hardest thing I had to do in my life was, one, stop being a bonehead, but that was a whole other thing. But two, was giving up this idea that I had some kind of personal right to be something. And let me define that, because you're like, what? I don't have personal rights? No, you don't. But what I mean by that is you have rights only in that you are rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ. And so having an identity and knowing that you are rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ, and everything else comes out of that as a wellspring, and it doesn't get there. You don't end up at Jesus, you start at Jesus. And so you are a child of God who then does this, or who then does this, or you're a child of God who struggles with this, or you're a child. Everything flows out of being a child of God who is called for a purpose to serve in the kingdom of heaven, and then everything else after that comes out of that. So that's where I would ground and root identity.
Yeah.
What they said. No. Same thing. It's in Jesus, right? So when I think of my life story, I think of a little bit more of relationally, right? So if I was single till I was 45, you're kind of always thinking, well, whose am I? Okay, so my dad loves me. Am I still his? Or do I belong to this company? Or I work for this person or this church? Or I can produce this? And so I struggled with it for a long time. And so what God's really set me free in, probably in the last decade before I actually got married, was that my identity really is in Jesus Christ. And in that, I'm his daughter, and I have authority, and I have worth, and I can stand firm, and I have a calling, and I have all those things flow out of that. Not how much I could produce for God's church as fast and as quick as I could to keep up with the guys. It was really who I am as a woman of God. I'm his girl. I'm his daughter. I am beloved. I am safe. Like, I could make you a whole list. So that's when I think of identity. That's who I am.
Great. No. All right, so we are going to work our way back and start with you, Shannon. So I'm going to hand this right back to you. But now, you all, when I look at all of you, you all have some unique stories and unique things that you've gone through in your histories, both in the deep past and recently. Tell us a little bit, in the context of your story, how identity issues were related to that, either in past hurts and like maybe ways in which your sense of identity was not great, and then how has it gotten healthier? So yeah, just in the context of all your stories. And for Shannon, I know you've also been a woman working in complementarian ministry worlds, and you've gotten slighted at times and all those sort of things. Like but I've also seen someone who has a healthy sense of identity endure those things in pretty amazing ways. So tell us.
That's called get on your knees and have Jesus help you. So, super quick high level is I grew up a Christian school kid, K through 12, Scottsdale Christian Academy. Love the school, nothing wrong with Christian education. So from a very early age, your identity for me was to be an achiever, a 4.0, and you follow that list of rules and you don't break them, right? You don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't sleep around, you don't do all the things because you're a Christian school kid. My dad's on the board, all those things. I got a little sister who's watching me. So as I rolled into ASU, super naive, did not do well. It was not one of you right now at all, let me tell you. At all would I be sitting here. I rolled up at Scottsdale Bible at 23, met him, and met my first group of girlfriends that were healthy and didn't have to date, didn't have to have a boyfriend, didn't have to hustle, didn't have to have a 4.0 or 6 job offers. And so it was always in all of that. But was really marked in those years was I did break all those things, that I was a good girl. I was a Christian schoolgirl, and I did everything on there. And so what Jesus did for me, it's gonna sound crazy, July 21st of 2000 in a parking lot with one of the mentors in our young adults group is really broke the bondage and the shame I had of a scarlet letter of all that. And that was the first time God set me free, that my identity was not in my achievements or my rules, but in who I was. In him. So it was one of my first experiences. And then if you fast forward, I actually was a business major. I have an MBA because I enjoy business and ministry. And God did a big right turn when I was about 25, 26, and I started going to seminary. And God's like, you're called to ministry. And I was like, what? There's no money in ministry. Like, what's a girl going to do in early 2000s in ministry? Like, what am I going to be, everybody's admin? Like, what is this going to be? And so, because I remember thinking, like, I could probably lead the team. And I would actually do spiritual gifts tests, and I would lie, because, right, I'm a Christian kid. Like, so I knew how to make it come up as admin and like mercy and not leader, because it's like, what are you going to do with a girl like that? So I would always hide everything that I was, because I was like, no one's going to want to marry me and no one's going to want to hire me, because I need to be real good and consistent and quiet. So long and the short of it, I did that for many, many years, worked for many gentlemen, some good, some unkind, some that knew like, this girl, like, I'm not threatened by her, and she will run my whole department for me. I was like, you got it, buddy. I got it for you. You tell me what to do, I got it. And those, we would thrive, and we would have a blast, and I would get to know them, and we'd do incredible things. And then sometimes it was really hard, and sometimes I was told a lot of things. But all along, my heart wanted to just serve Jesus and really see his kingdom and his church and his gospel, the saving grace of Jesus Christ, proclaimed to everybody. That was all I really cared about. Just if somebody would let me on their team, I would just do whatever they said at whatever nonprofit or church. I just wanted to be on the team. So God really formed my identity through a lot of those years of me actively forgiving if something was goofy. I had a very good dad, so I could go back to him, which I know is a rare thing. Dad, am I really XYZ? And he's like, nope. You keep trucking, you do what God called you to do. I would have men like a Brett Berger or other gentlemen that would be like, hey, you're actually worthy and you're actually okay. That would help me write that back. Sometimes I would have to leave an organization with dignity and honor and grace in a really good way. You never rage quit. You don't slander. You don't burn bridges. Everybody knows everybody in this town, in the Christian circle. So if you're going to stay in the Christian circle, don't burn bridges, because everybody knows everybody. It's literally happening right now.
It's true.
So I walked through the theology department. Yes. I was like, I know that guy, I know that guy, I know that guy. We all grew up together, so be wise at all times. I'm glad you didn't know me at ASU. So I'm trying to think anything else specific on identity. And then, in the last 10 years, God really, really spoke deeply to me, because I wanted kids. I really wanted to be married. I wanted kids, and that didn't happen. And so I had to be like, Lord, I love you so much. Like, marriage is a good thing. Kids are a good thing. Have you forgotten me? Are you cruel? What's up? Do I not count? I've worked hard for you. I've served you. And then I could hear my own words, right? Like, he doesn't, you don't get married because you've worked hard. Like, and so I could hear my own theology fall right apart and my own cry out to the Lord. And there's a lot of older single gals like that. I have probably 50 girlfriends. They're all in their 40s and they'll probably never have babies. And they serve Jesus like maniacs. And they never got to get married or have kids. And I don't know why. And so your identity has to be really rooted in Jesus. And he steered that back for me and really had it grounded in the Lord. So no matter if I get married and have kids or not, I'm still worthy. I'm still a part of his kingdom and I still matter. So, and we're both too crazy.
But you
wild.
found this guy.
Out of the blue. Wait till you hear this. Da-na-na-na.
Now this is a story.
It is. My dad was donating to a little nonprofit for over 20 years. And I always joke we paid for my husband. Wait till you hear what it is.
So can we give it up for my wife? She's amazing,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
She
No.
two things that I've always loved about my wife before we ever even dated was that she loves Jesus more than she would ever love me. Like,
Amen.
she just loves Jesus more than she'd ever love me. And that's not a slight on me in any way. It's just that she has it in the right order. And so she loves Jesus and she loves her little buddies. And she loves telling people about Jesus. So she grew up as a Christian school kid, tried to do all the right things, get all the right grades. And I was about as opposite as that as you can get. I grew up about a mile from a river in Oklahoma, a little place called Muskogee. Man, I grew up, I had a rough time. My mom's a great lady. My mom's a school teacher, but my dad is a horrible, well, not alive now, but was a very horrible dad. He was abusive. He was an alcoholic. He was a drug addict. He was a criminal. My dad was involved in motorcycle clubs. My dad was involved in the Aryan prison gangs. We used to joke, and I guess it's not really a funny joke, but when you're growing up, things are funny. Weird things are funny when you grow up weird like that. But they used to always joke that the family business was prison. So that was always kind of the joke on my dad's side of families. Everyone was in the family business, and family business was prison. So my dad went to prison when I was 11. Really traumatic experience. Our house got raided, and he went off for like 18 years. So we moved to Oklahoma City, and I don't know if you guys have ever been around someone who had a traumatic childhood, but you might have a funky view of God, right? And so I grew up pretty atheist. I was antithetical. I was actually aggressively against people that were Christian. And so I would go out of my way to make a point that they were dumb or stupid or hid behind a book or all of these things, right? So I was that guy. And that carried on all the way until I was high school. I was a super smart kid, so I relied on my own ability a lot. I relied on my own intelligence. I didn't have to work very hard, so a lot of things came easy to me, which would pay off later in horrible ways. But so I went to college, didn't do well. Got a full ride to the University of Oklahoma, did not do well. But during that time, I decided that I'd be everything that my dad wasn't. We were talking about this earlier, where you don't want to do something or you don't want to be something, so you concentrate really hard on not being that thing. I always relate it to people that are trying to quit smoking. For you guys, maybe vaping. We'll just keeping it culturally relevant. But cigarettes, you see, were things before vape, and they were actually lit with fire. Anyways,
Yes.
So people are trying to quit something, and so they're just constantly thinking, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And so what happens? You do it, right? Same thing happened to me and my dad. I just concentrated so hard on not being my dad that all I thought about was how I'm not going to be like him. I'm not going to be an addict. I'm not going to be a criminal. I'm going to be around for my family. And so I decided at the age of 19 to get married, because that's what you do, because that'll fix it. And so this really broken individual who was 19 got married to another really broken individual who was 18. And we were married for 6 years, and we had 2 kids, and everything was great. I really tried to do what I thought was right. But you see, I didn't have God in my life. I refused. I actually went to school for Eastern thought and philosophy because I was seeking something, but it was not going to be Jesus. Like, you wanted to tell me about how Taoism is the study of the natural world and how there's like Star Wars like force around us that we can somehow tap into and control. I'm here for it. You want to talk about a dude named Jesus? I don't want to hear it. So I was kind of crazy in that way. I was like, I'll seek anything, but not Jesus. And so at 25, I got divorced, and in about a year's time, my dad got out of prison, and he's not really a champion for good things. And so I started hanging around him, and I became a horrible methamphetamine addict for the next 13 years. By the time I was 31, I'd been arrested over 20 times. I have more felonies than I do fingers on my right hand. I have 7 felonies for drug use. And so I found myself getting out of prison at the age of 38, and I was going to go right back to prison for another 13 years. And in this 2-month span of getting out of prison, going back to county jail to go right back to prison, this crazy thing happens. Someone comes to me, my mom comes to me and says, hey, I found this. These guys knocked on my door in Phoenix, because my mom had moved away from Oklahoma to get away from me. And she said, these guys knocked on my door in Phoenix, and they said about this drug rehab out there. And I was like, cool. I was all about it. And she goes, it's Christian. And I was like, I don't know, man. Prison doesn't sound so bad. Actually said that to my mom through a plexiglass window in Oklahoma in a county jail.
Christians.
Yeah, it's like Christians. Like 13 years, I'd only do half of that. That's like 6.5. That's not bad. But the prison sentence got a little bit longer, just long enough where I was like, okay, tell me more about this year long. So in the span of 60 days, I went from going to prison for 13 to 15 years for drug use to leaving the state of Oklahoma and signing a piece of paper that said I wouldn't live or drive within 60 miles of the state of Oklahoma for 8 to 10 years. Makes it sound like I'm some bad dude. I just a really bad drug addict. I think they were just like, dude, please leave. We don't want you driving a car here. We just want you to go. And so I came to Phoenix, Arizona, completely broke down. I think I got here. I'd started using drugs again before I got here. I weighed 128 pounds. I was a size like 27-inch waist, 38. I joke, I look like a Bitmoji. My head was still the same size, but my body was like this. I was like... Yeah. So, but second day I was there, I was professing atheist, mad at God.
Teen Challenge.
Teen Challenge is the name of the organization I went to, if you guys have ever heard of it.
Yeah.
Teen Challenge, downtown Phoenix. They said, get in the van. And I was like, where are we going? They said, get in the van. And I was like, all right, fine. And so we get in the van and I go to this little crazy, full-blown Pentecostal church. I'm probably still a little, this will bump somebody's apple cart of theology a little bit here. I was probably still a little bit high from the residual of being up for a week. And we go to this full-blown Pentecostal church in downtown Phoenix. I'm talking tambourines, flags, people yelling. So, hey, by the way, Fire and Water Church. I love those guys. You guys look them up, Pastor Gus. I'm sitting over here in the corner, and during the sermon, he just stopped out of nowhere and just walks down the end of the stage and says, somebody down here needs to hear this. I was the only one sitting over there. And then for the next 5 minutes, he did. He walked over and he stands on the edge of the stage. He's like, somebody over here needs to hear this. And I was like, he's talking to me. And he just told me this really simple thing. It wasn't life-changing, but for some reason it hit me weird. It hit me funny. I went back, and for the first time in my life, I sat down and I said, God, if you're real, I can't do this on my own. And I said, I can't quit smoking cigarettes, and can't quit getting high. And if you'll help me do that, I'll do whatever you ask. It's just one of those kind of things, you just throw it up. If you'll help me do this, man, I'll do whatever you ask. About 2 weeks goes by, and I realize that I haven't craved methamphetamines for the first time in 13 years for 2 straight weeks. In fact, I have never had a day in my life since. And I got really scared because I told God I'd do whatever he said. And I was like, oh, I'd been reading, I had started reading the Bible at that time, and it started to make sense to me for the first time in my life. And I realized somewhere in the Old Testament it said if you break a covenant with God, it falls back on you like 7-fold. And I was like, I can't be 7 times a drug addict the way I was. I'm going to die. And so for the next 13, 12 years now, all I've done is just say yes to God.
Amen.
Whatever it looks like. I don't recommend this to everyone, but I'm kind of a crazy nut. So if God says jump, I jump, and then ask him how we're going to land on the way down.
Not anymore.
He's never. Well, yeah, my wife's probably like, no. But I've just, I just say yes to God, whatever it is. If God's like, hey, get up and talk in front of 1,000 people, okay, good. I don't know what I'm going to say, God, you'll do it. If God says, I want you to do the hard thing and reach into this person's life and have a real conversation about who Jesus Christ is, even though it's going to cost you a lot. Even though it's going to cost you a lot in your own personal life, in your time, and your talent, and your treasure, I want you to do it. I just say yes. So
that's good.
Yeah,
that's good. That's good. Man, I don't want to follow that
story. No,
We're going to test your identity here. Basically, you start inflating your story.
You're so good.
I think I'm going to kind of skip over coming to know Jesus. Somewhat similar story, not drug addict, but definitely grew up atheist, that kind of thing. Grew up in Tucson, Arizona, which is like the Portland of Arizona. So I didn't really know much about Jesus, didn't really have any sort of like context for that. But Jesus came into my life, and I from the moment I gave my life to Jesus, I found myself like leading in churches. And maybe some of you are like that. You get saved in your youth group and you're like, what should I do? Well, I'll just kind of help out in my youth group. And then you help out in another thing and you do another thing. And I found myself leading in church pretty quick. And first time I was offered a position at a church, I was 20 years old. And I jumped in and said, okay, and I accepted a worship pastor position. I didn't know what I was doing. Church of like 80 people in Tucson, which is about the average size of a church in Tucson. And I think that there was something in me that, that was 22 years ago now. And I've been in different kinds of churches all along the way. But when my wife and I got married, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Again, you're like, what do I want to do? Maybe you ask, hey, what do you do? I'm sure around here people say, what's your major? They're trying to figure out like what makes you tick. And I ended up going to art school at U of A and getting a degree in fine arts. And I found myself working for people like David Crowder and Carrie Job, doing graphic design and stuff for them. And I didn't really know at the time, but I was really weaving an identity around myself. Like I just, for whatever reason in my mind, I started like making this caricature of myself that I'm not just the normal pastor guy. I'm like a creative guy. I'm a behind the scenes guy. I'm not really like a pastor guy. I'm not good at preaching. I'm not good at these things. And it's funny how that identity starts to really seep into who you are. And I remember, so years later, I was working at a church, and I was sitting with a team of pastors, and I've always been the kind of guy too, where I never felt like I fit in a room, if that makes sense. Like I'd sit in a room and I'm like, I don't know where I fit here. I don't know what to do with my hands. Like I don't know, should I be creative? There's like a little prophetic part of me. So I always want to kind of like poke at the thing that I'm like, but also I don't think that's right. But I've learned I piss people off when I do that. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that too much. So I'm sitting in the room and I'm like, I don't really know what to do. And I think at that point, it's like the boiling frog. I had been in ministry for, 12, 15 years, something like that. And I had been seeping in this sort of out of whack identity for a long time. And I remember we were brainstorming about something and I said, well, maybe we should do this because, people are, I was doing something again that was a little bit different than what would be expected in the room. And a pastor that I really love and I really looked up to, he looked at me and he said, well, you're saying that because you're not a pastor. You're saying that because you just don't have a pastoral mindset. That's just not who you are. And I was like, oh, well, I just think differently than you, And it's one of those things where sometimes you get hurt and you don't know you're hurt until a lot later. And that hurt me a lot more than I thought. I went home and went to bed. I didn't lose any sleep about it. But it like stuck in the back of my brain. It just kind of like hung out there for a while. And fast forward a few years, I'd been at Living Streams. I'm working with David Stockton, and David comes to me and he says, hey, I'm going to be taking sabbatical, but I don't think it's going to be 3 months. I think I'm going to take 1 year sabbatical. And we're like, okay. And then after a few months, he and I had a conversation. He's like, I think you're the one that needs to like lead the church while I'm out. And immediately my brain was like, I'm not a pastor though. Like that's not who I am. It's not just like, I'm the creative guy. I'm the behind the scenes guy. I lead worship. I can make good video content. I could create art. That's just not who I am. And I didn't say this to him, but this thought process in my brain was just running. And I remember even the first Sunday that I had to preach after David and I had that conversation. The entire time I stood up there, I was like, this is not who I am. This is not what I do. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a preacher. This is not what I do. And I don't know, it's like one of those things that I know nobody in that room would have known that that's what I was thinking. But behind the scenes, I was just ruminating on this sort of out of whack identity. And I remember I sat with a guy that I really respected. And honestly, it kind of makes me tear up even thinking about it. And we were going into it. He had joined our teaching team. I'll just say his name because he won't care. His name is Jeff Goki. He's a great guy. He's a guy I really look up to. He's awesome. And he came in and he was like, I want to help you. I want to serve you. I'm going to join the teaching team and all of that. And I was feeling all kinds of insecurity because I'm going, Jeff, like I don't know what I'm going to bring to you as your leader, And he said something and I said, well, I think maybe you could help lead this. And I think he could pick up that I was trying to say, you could lead this because I'm like, who am I to do that, And Jeff paused and he's like, you're my pastor and I'm going to get behind anything that you say and I'm here to serve you however you want me to. And in the moment, I was like, I didn't even know what to do with it. Like you would think that would feel really good, but it felt really uncomfortable for me to hear. I was like, and everything in me wanted to fight it. And I think sometimes God brings deliverance in a moment, This was one, I think it was a lie that God had to work out of me over a season. And there was moments where I was like, oh, I think I'm on the other side of it. And then there's moments I'd go up to preach and I'm like, nope, I'm not on the other side of it. But the amazing thing is, this was probably now over 4 years ago, there was just a real rewiring of who I was. And at that point, I'm like, you know what? I think I want to go back to seminary. I want to get my master's in theology. And I started to lean into maybe this is who I am. Maybe that word that I heard, and I'll say this too, that pastor that said that thing to me, I am still really good friends with him. I think we throw away relationships really quick. But he is now my biggest fan because I didn't throw that relationship away, because I kept coming back to the table. And I forgave him for it. I knew it was an off-the-cuff thing. He didn't mean anything by it, but the enemy really did, and I really bit off on it. And people say all sorts of uncareful things with you, but it's your choice to hold on to it. And it's your choice to deal with it when it comes up. Like, oh, crap, I got to deal with this thing. And I think a season of working through emotionally healthy spirituality, things like that I hadn't really worked through before, counseling. But identity issues come into pastors too. They come into really good places. We were talking about this before, like maybe your identity is, and everybody comes to me for biblical knowledge. That could start off in a really good place. It can end in a really bad place. Serving your theological mind turns into a God that's not very gracious on you. Serving your ability to serve other people. I'm the guy who always helps everyone. Or I'm the girl that always helps everyone. Whenever they have a need, I'm the person that comes. This is an identity anchor that starts to bite back at some point. And you have to kind of recalibrate and go, no, Jesus, it's not about what I'm doing. It's about who I am. And sometimes as a pastor, you let people down. Sometimes as a pastor, people ask a theological question. You go, I don't know. It's a good question. And if your identity is rooted in those things, it could come back and bite you. But then on the other side, someone may say, hey, you're a pastor. And you're like, oh, no, I'm not a pastor. That could be one of those things too. That's like, what is that that's rooted in you? What is that thing that's telling you that's getting in the way of God using you in a way that maybe you don't imagine yourself being? And I could stand now a few years later, 3 or 4 years later, going, I don't actually deal with that anymore. I'm going, oh, I'm free from it. It's kind of like, your addiction. It's like one day you wake up and you go, oh, it's gone. I haven't dealt with that in a long time. But those are the kind of things that creep in when you're a pastor. Those are the kind of things that get sneaky in terms of your identity.
So, no, that's good.
Can I go? No, this is great. Yeah.
It's good. It's good.
So as you guys were going, I felt like I needed to change the order of what our questions were. So the identity is, we have misshapen, ill-formed identity issues that affected like in each one of you. And then there's the kind of growth towards health, where you have a healthier sense of who you are. Can you maybe in kind of brief, because I don't want to camp out on this too much, but do you have little practices or things that you do that have helped you to grow or to kind of maintain or break those scripts in your life? So maybe we'll work back.
Sure,
from
I'll do it real short. But I think emotionally healthy spirituality was a big eye opener for me. I started going to counseling. I know your generation is a lot more okay with that, which is awesome. But I kind of grew up in a place where they're like, go to counseling if you're really messed up. I think sometimes you go to counseling just so you don't get on that messed up place. But I've also learned how to communicate better with my wife, be a lot more self-aware. And I don't know if I would boil it down to practices, but there was a real effort early on to go, what am I feeling? What am I saying over myself? What are the things that I'm ruminating on? and going, okay, well, and what's false about that? How does that line up with the Word of God? How does that line up with what people say about me? How does that line up with? So I've gotten a lot more sensitive. I could be in a room, and like that situation, somebody could go, "You're not a pastor." In some ways, I'm more sensitive than I ever have been, in a good way, because I'm going, "Oh, ooh, that's not good. I'm going to like put that over here right now and make sure that I can maybe come back to it." Or I just don't let it seep in any deeper than skin depth, you know. But that self-awareness is really important. But it really does get in the way of your spiritual growth. But you become more aware of that, and you practice that awareness of where you're at. It does pay dividends for your identity.
Yeah, one of the things that what he was saying, that being more, you guys are more in tune with your emotions than I think any generation before you. The generation right above me doesn't even know how to spell the word emotion, and then my generation just knew what they were, and they were bad. And so one of the things that's really been helpful to me, because he touched on a lot of it already, but one of the things that I found very helpful is as you grow in your ministry and as you grow in your pastoral assignment and as you grow in what you do, you get. A boss used to say dumb stuff all the time, and I used to think it was dumb, but I'll tell you, he used to say that the higher you go on the ladder of success, the more people can see your butt. Although, it was very telling me. But what I've noticed is people that I really respect, that have been in ministry for a very long time and have been very successfully consistent. I wouldn't say necessarily successful by our eyes, but consistent to me is successful. If you show up the same person every day and love Jesus the same way every day, do you know how hard that is to do? That's near impossible. So consistency to me is longevity, and every one of them that I know, they get so high up in their position in their church that they're sitting on the top and there's no one around them. And so this is where it gets difficult, and this is where it gets tricky, because you get to a point where all of your peers are people that you serve, that look up to you as their pastor. Yeah. If you do not have a group of people that hold you accountable to what you say and what you do and who you are in your relationship to Jesus, you get into you want to get into some funky theology, sit in a room and develop it all on your own. Yeah. Like, that's how cults start. I'm going to tell you right now. Some dude's sitting in a room, he's like, well, you know what, I think God is a bowl of spaghetti. What do you guys think? Nobody's room, he's like, yep, that's what I thought, bowl of spaghetti.
There's no verse that says he's not a bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah, there's no, exegetically he's right, but just know there's
he can do anything.
Yeah.
If he is all things, this is true, but just know that in a vacuum, which we tend to get in as leadership, your theology can get weird. The way you look at the world can get weird. The way you start to treat other people can get weird. So for me, succinctly, I would say you have to have an accountability group in your life that you travel through life together with, and that can pull you and say, hey, dude, you're kind of being a right now. And you can go, but I'm the pastor of a church. And they're like, yeah, you're that too, but you're both. Yeah. And so I think that's really healthy.
You've heard a couple of us talk about how we've kind of learned a skill of self-awareness and kind of knowing when we're going down a certain hole or a certain path. And so what I would have given for someone to teach me some of the things I've learned in the last 10 years in my early 20s, I think I would have made a lot of decisions different or lived without as much fear or shame or anxiety. And so what I would say is, for many years, almost like a spirit of diminishment, or that I was very insecure, and I desperately wanted approval, and I wanted to be on the team, and I wanted to prove my worth at all times. And so out of that, I would just work and work. And so what God taught me, and what I still have to actively practice, is what is true. You know, you think of that scripture, what is true, what is pure, what is noble. I have to work through that. What do I really know about myself? How did God really make me? Where is my worth? I have to actively work through that at times. And because I'm older, I know myself better. So I'll tell you, I burn out super bad at 31 years old, working my butt off, I was at a nonprofit. I was in charge of all fundraising, all events, big team, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But all I wanted was to have a director title. Like, I was like, I'm going to make it at 30 and I'm going to be a director. And it literally, I remember God not asking him if I could be it. I made it happen. And it literally did me in. Anxiety pills, counseling, couldn't sleep, had to move back in with my parents. So I got the job and my title said director, but I literally crashed and burned, melted out. And then here I am about 15 years later, and I currently oversee a foster home, a licensed DCS foster home, on top of local outreach for all 5 campuses at our church with a team. And it was about a month ago, and because I'm older and I know myself, I could feel it. And I was like, it's coming. Like I could perform at high levels. I have a high energy, a high ability to just keep cranking. And I was like, I think I'm cracking. I think it's coming, and I better do something and draw back so I don't burn out like I did at 30 because I'm trying to please a bunch of people or keep every plate spinning. So opposite of what I used to be, I actually have to look across the table at a mega church boss and say, sir, I am a high performer and I passionately love my church, but I don't think I can do all of this anymore. Usually you get fired, man. Like you get canned. In the real world, if you're in sales, you're done. And I came from a sales home, and my dad was a salesman, and instead, we have a very, very, very healthy culture. And the gentlemen were like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to change this? Who are we going to hire? How are we going to pivot this? I'd never had anybody treat me that way, that I wasn't just a production machine, and there's going to be another chick coming right behind me that can just pump it out, and she's 30, and so she'll crank better than you will. And so I have self-monitoring things. I have friends that check in with me. I go before the Lord with a pure heart. Who haven't I forgiven? Who am I ticked at? Keep a really pure heart. Otherwise, you can get real pissed at the church, right? So the reason I've made it so long working at God's church, because everywhere I've worked, someone's cheated, someone stole money, or someone's lied. Every single place I've ever worked. 7 nonprofits. It just is what it is, man. If you feel called to ministry, you got to keep your eyes drilled in on Jesus Christ, who he is, what he says about you, and you keep trucking. And if he releases you from that nonprofit after tons of prayer, checking with people in wisdom, then okay. But if he doesn't, you keep trucking. Or if it's extreme unhealthy, that's a whole different story, and of course you can leave. But everywhere I've ever been, somebody's crashed and burned in front of me. But it doesn't mean I gave up on Jesus or his bride. You have to really have an ability to keep that separate, because if my identity is wrapped up in all that, it went right down the tubes with the dude that cheated and left and ruined the church, right? There went my whole job. I have allegiance to Jesus Christ. He is my number one. And so he'll get me to the next thing. And without fail, he's given me every job I've ever had. I've never even had to look for one. Like somehow the phone just rings and I have my next thing. So those are all the different ways that I keep my heart in check as a woman. And I have really close friends, and I'm very transparent with him. So he'll tell me, hey, you're getting weird. I'll be like, what? You're weird.
I had something to add, if that's okay.
You're weird.
Yeah,
But now you know why she's an all-timer. So.
I think the other practice too, and this is something I think you could look at biblically, you have to practice humility.
Yes.
And you have to practice it.
Big time.
It's an exercise. Yes.
I think it's so telling when Jesus is washing the feet of the disciples. The very beginning of that story, Jesus is setting up his identity. And it says that Jesus knew who he was. He knew that he belonged to the Father, and he knew where he was going. So Jesus, even as a precursor to this massive act of humility, he had a rooted identity in who he was and where he was going. He knew that. And I think that that's one of those things that's really changing in church leadership, because I think a lot of us have slipped into this thing of celebrating leadership of the world and not looking at it the way that Jesus looks at it. And I think even you go all the way back to Samuel and the people of Israel asking Samuel, like, hey, we want a king. And Samuel's like, you don't want a king. You don't want a king. And he's like, I do want a king. They said, we do want a king. And there's an interesting conversation that happens between Samuel and God. And God says, they're not rejecting you, Samuel, they're rejecting me. So there's something about wanting a king that is rejecting God and his rightful place of authority. And then afterward, when he finds Saul, there's this interesting change in the Hebrew where God says, go find Saul and go anoint him as prince over my people. He doesn't say king, he says prince. He changes the name and changes that title. And I think so much unhealth in church leadership comes from trying to position ourselves in our own kingdom. Because when we build a kingdom around ourselves, like a lot of pastors fall into, when the king falls, the kingdom falls. So everybody starts, falling away from the Lord. They start going, oh, I don't even know now that this pastor left. And we point, and it's so easy to point the finger at the salacious sin of the fallen pastor. But I think we need a generation where we point our finger back and go, why do we keep elevating that kind of leadership? And why did I sink my trust into them and not Jesus? And it seems like a finer point, but I think it's so vitally important. And for a church leader, that's where you fall into all sorts of things. These sort of like socially acceptable sins of being a workaholic and, and doing all of these things. You're like, oh no, it's good. That's great. What it turns into is the unsocially acceptable sins. And then we all point the finger and go, oh man, look at that. And not that we shouldn't be careful of sexual sin. We should absolutely be careful of it. But there are precursors to it in our identity that we have to watch. And if you're trying to position yourself as a pastor, when I came in and David said, hey, I'd like you to lead Living Streams, I didn't fight for that. I didn't go, you know what I should do? I didn't have like the 10 steps of, let me just like throw elbows and make sure I'm the guy. I was standing there going, are you sure? And then when I took that, I was like so grateful because I'm like, I didn't, it's like the effort you take to try to take something, you have to keep putting forward that effort to sustain it. So I didn't put forward all this effort to like get lead pastor position. It was handed to me. So there was this ease in it of like, okay, Lord, I'm just going to walk in it. Like I didn't fight for this anyway. I don't have to keep fighting for it. And I think when you're young and you're jumping into a church or you really want that pastoral position, you have to remember to practice humility. And there's some young leaders that are so good at that. And there's young leaders that are better at that than guys in their 60s, honestly. Like I've seen that where there's some people that have never practiced that and they've just fought for everything. But they live in this really graceless world where they're just having to white knuckle everything that they've earned in life. And I think there's just so much ease in going, Lord, I'm going to take the low road. I know who I am. I know where I'm going. And I'm just going to always consistently practice humility. So, yeah.
That's great.
That's really
All
good.
right, so you guys are going to share this. We've got a few more minutes, and I'm going to get to some student questions, all right? So I'm going to jump off the stage, and now's your chance to ask some questions. So if anybody raises a hand, I will run to you, and you guys can ask
Great answers.
any questions. Anything? Anybody?
Who does? Mr. Blue.
We got one.
Right.
dat?
I
Ben's
see that
good
hand,
for it.
and I see that hand, and I see, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so when it comes to like discipleship or that sort of thing, right? You talk about identity and the ways in which leaders have said things that like aren't true, this or that. So at what point like do you distinguish when you're like entering into discipleship with someone, or like at what point is it like I'm protecting myself, I'm using, wisdom, discernment? At what point is it like I'm being insubordinate, I'm not, I already know what's right, and I'll find someone who's willing to affirm that, or I'll hear someone say something different and that's not true, and so they're, like at what point is that?
Okay, I could jump in. Yeah. So what I'm discerning is like maybe you're working with a leader and they're saying, hey, maybe these are things you're good at and things you're not good at. They're like trying to help coach you through it, and you're trying to figure out at what point is it setting up some sort of unhealthy identity, maybe something along those lines?
Yeah, like at what point is it like I'm being discipled by this person, I'm using humility, I'm trusting them, and at what point is it like they're wrong or like?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to have people in our life that have authority. And it's so good to have humility to lay in front of leaders and say, lay yourself out in front of leaders and go, hey, like, help me, coach me, lead me, But it is so important to remember that that leader isn't Jesus. So sometimes early on in your discipleship, or maybe when you're younger, people are going, hey, I see this in you and you're really good at that and you're not really good at that. In my experience, that's ebbed and flowed over the years a little bit for me. And there are some things that are pretty consistent. But there are some things that have ebbed and flowed. So submitting all things under Jesus and going, hey, I hear that and I'm going to submit that under Jesus is really important. If you're talking about functioning in terms of leadership under their leadership, then it is important if a leader says, hey, I love that you want to do that. I don't want you to do that. To go, okay, well, maybe there is something in me that wants to do that. But right now I'm submitted to leadership. And I'm submitted to what they're saying. And there is a line between saying I'm submitted to what you would like me to do in your leadership versus who I am as a leader. And there has to be that healthy barrier between who you are and what you do. And so with any even really great people that are discipling you, again, they may say some things that 10 years later, you're like, that hurt, and that was not true. So you have to submit all of those things to Jesus. That's what I would say. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, I've got a really good mentor that I've had for a long time. Two things I think I always say is, when you're into discipleship and people are speaking into your life, that's a careful place and a weighty place to be. And so there's a sliding scale of the amount to let someone speak into my life and the amount that we are invested in discipleship and relationship together. So there's a lot of people that'll drive by and be like, hey, the Lord gave me a word. Cool, keep it.
Yeah.
And hold on to it, because the veil's been torn and I can go and talk to Jesus and he can give me that word. But if you know someone that you've trusted and you've walked through life together, you've experienced life together, and I always say, like, you've sat in foxholes together, and you've waged war, and you've gone through trials together, blood and mud, so to speak. Then when those people speak into my life, I listen, because we've experienced life together. But it's when, someone that maybe we don't experience life together like that, and they're like, hey, let me tell you what I know about you. And you're like, okay, cool. I don't really get, I'm like, thank you. And then I chew the meat and spit the bones. I take it all to the Lord and I say, Lord, this is what I heard. This is what someone told me. This is yours. And whatever's for me, give it back. Yeah. And that's always worked. I submit everything to the Lord, and I'm always humbly ready to hear even things that I don't want to. Because sometimes people tell me things and speak things and say things into my life that I don't want to hear, but they're true. Yeah. And so if I submit it to the Lord and I hand it to the Lord and the Lord hands it back, I'm like, no, take it back. And he's like, no, it's yours. And I'm like, no, take it. This is yours. And he's like, no. And I'm like, dang it, it's mine. Okay. So just be ready for that. But humbly submit everything to the Lord, all things, every time. I tell people all the time, don't listen to me, check the Bible. Don't take my word for it, go to the Lord. And so that's what I would say. All right.
We have, we'll do one more here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I've been waiting for this, dude. I just want you to know that we were prepared in our hearts
Yes.
that you were going to
Dr.
bring,
Anderson
like I
warned
was
them.
told, you were going to bring the heat.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they warned you.
No. He said it would be good. He said
Yeah.
you'd bring the heat.
Yeah.
I'll try. So recently I started working at a church, and I'm helping with like young adults ministry, young adults being like up into the 30s, but also like some of the ministries that I've been a part of have people who are like later, like 70s and 80s, and like there's these people who are really accomplished that I'm supposed to be ministering to, and it's like I don't necessarily know how to be able to speak into someone's life who has like a PhD, and it's like, so I just wanted to like hear your guys' advice of being like, okay, like I'm still really young and I feel like I shouldn't be in a position where I am leading people in that kind of way, but also it is like, okay, God has put me in that position of just being able to be like, how do you minister faithfully to people in a situation like that?
That's a really good question. I led a Bible study one of the first years I was at Scottsdale Bible. By the way, it's one of the smartest churches I've been in my life, everyone. So I'm led a Bible study with a guy who's probably 75. He was a pastor of a church for like 45 years. And he has his PhD in like Hebrew or something. And so I was leading the Bible study and he was coming to attend. His name was Roger. He's a great guy. And I remember one time we were talking, he's brought he would bring a Hebrew Old Testament and a Greek New Testament with him, and he would read out of them just like casually. And so, and I was leading the Bible study, and so he said something really powerful to me that I'll never forget. I looked at him and said, Roger, I have nothing to teach you. I don't even know why you come. And he was like, because the Lord has placed you in a place, and I am here to find out what the Lord wants to speak to me. Yeah. And so, I think that you have to remember the Lord put you there. And it may not be to impart more wisdom, because you may not have more wisdom to give them, but there's something that you have that is valuable to the ministry of Jesus. Some of it may be some humility that they need in their lives to submit humbly underneath the teaching of a kid who's 22 and say, okay, Lord, this guy's younger than me and I know more than he does. What do I have here? What do you have for me here? And so, because it's not you and it's not your ability, it's the Lord. Yeah. And so the Lord's qualified in all areas, in all times, in all places. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. I think that you have to be confident in your calling, not your ability. So I think what you have is really actually something you should retain, which is a humility of going, God, I don't know, part of me is like, hey, join the club. Like, none of us feel like, oh man, and honestly, the people that are like, I'm super equipped to do this, like, those are actually the people to be careful about, you know. But you can have confidence. I mean, when Paul's telling Timothy, like, don't let anybody look down at you because your age, like, there is a confidence in how God's led you to this place that you could say, okay, here I am. I'm going to trust that you're going to use me here, and I'll bring any knowledge that I have, and I'll be humble about the knowledge I don't have. And I think that that's a really important thing to keep. I think when you try to spin your wheels and go, gosh, I'm going to like memorize all the things and I'm going to do all this stuff and I'm going to answer everyone's question all the time, like it's never going to work. That's just not what ministry is about. It's not just this sort of Bible answer man, and you know, that's part of it, you know, like you bring some wisdom and open up the word, and you know, you gain a lot from theology school. There's a ton that you gain here, but practically once you start doing ministry, there's that really good, like, healthy dose of humility of going, Lord, what do I do? We had a situation at Living Streams years ago, and we had some good friends, and their son died of a really rare brain cancer when he was 7 years old. And he explained like what it was like in those last moments with his son. And I remember sitting there going, Lord, there is nothing I can bring right here. And I think that's where it's like, just weep with those who weep. Like the Bible says, you know, celebrate with those who celebrate. That it's not saying, you know what, whenever there's a huge tragedy, make sure you have like 8 Bible verses to back up your. That's not what a lot of times people need, and a lot of times what ministry requires. So I think hold some of that, you know. So.
Well, can you join me in just stating your appreciation with a round of applause? Really grateful for the 3 of you to take a night off and come and be with us. Very grateful. So I'm going to pray, and I'm just going to pray blessing over your ministries. And I know they would love, if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to answer or ask, they'd love to chat with you a little bit. So let me pray for you all. Father, I thank you for Shannon and Raygen and Ryan for taking a time out away from family or at the end of a long day of work to come and to share the wisdom that they've gleaned over the years, the things that you've taught them. And each one of them has a unique story. And we're so grateful to be able to have been blessed by the way that you've redeemed those stories. I pray for blessing over their ministries, for Raygen and Shannon as they take on this new role as the campus pastor in Fountain Hills, that you would just bless that and bear fruit of their work. And for Ryan, as he is being faithful over at Living Streams and also helping with this church plant, and again, just bear fruit of their ministry. I pray that you would continue for all of us to ground our identity in you, to remember who we are in you, and to minister from that and not from the void that we're trying to fill. So we give you thanks and praise, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.